servant leadership. I'm sure it's a phrase that you've heard many times and maybe even spent some time reflecting on. But for me, I've come to some new understandings of what this really means. I was starting to read through the book of Matthew, and in the first verse, in the first couple words, Paul writes, as a servant of God. And I've read that verse probably dozens of times in the past. And as I read that, wanted to reflect more on it. And I looked to the original word in the Bible, and the word doulos came up. A doulos leader, a servant leader. And I started to dig deeper. It really provided some clarity on the kind of leader that Christ is calling us to be. And I don't mean just leaders in the church or in religious organizations. A doulos leader, a bond servant kind of leader, is really applicable in any kind of organization that you want to be a part of. So I want to spend a couple minutes today reflecting more on what it means to be a doulos leader, a servant leader in your organization. Servant leadership, the word servant just has some really negative connotations, particularly in North America, but to really all around the world. This country has a really bad history with slavery that existed in the past, that still has ripple effects in the world that we're living in today. I also think of the sex trade, and that happens not only in North America but around the world, and how hundreds of thousands of women are forced into that trade, and the horror and the pain that causes. And I even think about kids today that are forced to work in sweatshops as really servants. And the word doesn't have great connotations. And yet, I think the way that, particularly when Matthew's talking about what it means to be a servant leader, he's not referring to often these negative ideas and imagery that we have of what it means to be a servant leader. I think Christ is calling us something more than what our word is. This idea that we need to redeem the word, what it means to be a servant, and particularly a bondservant. So I want to think about the context of being a servant with the context of the gospel, the good news. And it's amazing how often this idea of being a servant shows up in the scripture. Jesus transforms the concept of leadership, not only by the way he led, but how he talked about leadership, how the word humility begins to enter into the same context of what it means to be a leader. That didn't exist before Jesus' transformational way of living and leading. And the scripture is saturated with ways that can inspire us if we truly want to be a leader. This idea that God first, others second, I'm third is a concept for leaders, I think is a crucial thing that we need to understand and that we need to grow into. And I think this idea of humility and what it means to be a humble leader is something that you really need to be considering and reflecting upon as you think about your own leadership. That leadership is not about you. Leadership isn't about you getting the accolades or you getting the particular beefing up your resume. Leadership is about your ability to serve those people around you. And we have some great examples of that in the scriptures, and particularly in our Christ. So, what are the implications about being a doulos kind of leader, a servant leader? Well, I love these 11 pillars that talk about some of the skills and the ways in which you can operate as a leader. The first one is this idea that you have a bigger calling, that life is not about you, that you're trying to fulfill a bigger purpose by your leading in that organization. I think that's crucial. The second one talks about listening. What an important skill this is as a leader. Not only should we be gifted communicators, but a transformational way to lead is to be a listening kind of leader who is able to sit down with people and understand their perspectives. That leads right into this concept of empathy. Once I've listened to someone, can I empathize with their story? Can I understand why and how and what they believe? That's such a crucial thing about empathy. The fourth one they talk about is being a leader who creates an environment of healing. That we understand that people, organizations, sometimes even nations need to go through this process of healing. And that part of my job as a servant leader is to facilitate that as part of my organization. Developing self-awareness is another part of what it means to be a servant leader. If I'm someone who is not aware of my attitude and my actions and why I'm responding to certain scenarios, I'm not going to be the kind of leader that I need to be. So part of being a servant leader is being very self-aware of what's going on around you. Number 6, they talk about being a leader who's persuasive, someone that can actually have influence in a particular situation. It doesn't mean that you order people around. This doesn't mean that you just force people into doing things, but you persuade, that you convince, that you influence people to action. Number 7 talks about foresight. Another way of thinking about that is vision. Do you have a vision for the future that produces passion in people? A servant kind of leader is going to be someone that can cast a vision for what's in front of other people. Conceptualization is this idea that I have a vision. How do I now implement that vision into action steps, and how crucial that is in any organization. The last 3, stewardship, is really important to think about. How do you not only steward people and their gifts and talents, which is fundamentally the most important resource you have, but also as Christ followers, how do we steward the financial resources and also the planet to ensure that we can care for this important creation of God. Growth is another pillar of servant leadership. This idea that if I'm going to be a good leader, I need to be focused on growth and development, and what an important part that is. These pillars are crucial to think about it. And what I'd like you to think about as a leader, what are 2 to 3 of these pillars that you maybe need to grow in, and reflect on? And that's what I'd like to challenge you to think more about. So actually, that's the assignment for this particular leadership chat, is for you to identify 2 to 3 of these pillars of what it means to be a doulos kind of leader, that you need more development and more growth, and come up with a short reflective plan on ways that you might grow and develop in that area. You don't have to write paragraphs, but I'd like you to do some reflection on what that looks like for you. Thanks so much.